The divorce papers were still warm from the printer when I saw the Instagram post. Marcus, my ex-husband of exactly 72 hours, beaming beside a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. The caption made my blood run cold. Married my soulmate today. Sometimes you just know when it's right. Number second chances at love, number grateful. I stared at my phone screen until the words blurred. Married, already. After 6 months of him telling me he needed space to find himself and wasn't ready for commitment. After 12 years together, 3 of them married, he'd found his soulmate in less than a week. Her name was Sophia Chen, according to the flood of congratulatory comments. According to YouTube analytics, 99.5% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. She was a curator at the Metropolitan Museum, spoke 4 languages, had a PhD in art history from Columbia. Everything I wasn't. Everything he'd apparently wanted all along. I screenshot the post with shaking fingers, then threw my phone across my small studio apartment, the one I'd been forced to move into after Marcus kept our house. It hit the wall with a satisfying crack, but the image was already burned into my retinas. His hand on her lower back, the way he used to touch me when we first met. Her smile, radiant and genuine, the way mine used to be before years of his subtle criticisms, wore it down to something smaller, more careful. The worst part wasn't even the speed of it all. It was the look on his face, pure joy. A look I realized he'd never worn when looking at me, not even on our wedding day. That night, I did what any reasonable person would do. I stalked her social media until 3 a.m., mapping out her entire life like I was conducting a federal investigation. Sophia Chen, 29, originally from San Francisco. Art history, PhD, just as the comments had said. Worked at the Met for 2 years. Before that, she'd been in Paris, studying at the Sorbonne. But something nagged at me as I scrolled through her carefully curated Instagram feed. The photos were beautiful, her at gallery openings, candid shots in cafes, artfully arranged meals, but they felt almost too perfect, too deliberate, like someone had constructed an identity rather than lived one. I was being paranoid, I told myself. This was grief talking, the desperate need to find fault with the woman who'd apparently stolen my entire future in the span of a week. But then I saw it, 3 photos down in her feed, a selfie from what looked like a fancy restaurant. In the background, slightly out of focus but unmistakably recognizable, was Marcus. The timestamp read 6 months ago. 6 months ago. Right around the time he'd started asking for space. My hands trembled as I screenshot the image, zooming in until Marcus's face filled the screen. There was no mistaking it. The scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. The way his hair curled slightly at his collar. The navy blazer I'd bought him for his birthday last year. He'd been with her for months, while he was sleeping in our bed, eating meals I cooked, listening to me apologize for imaginary shortcomings. He'd been building a life with someone else. I felt something crack inside me. Not break exactly, but shift into a new configuration. Something harder and sharper than it had been before. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day researching. If Marcus thought he could rewrite our entire history, erase 12 years like they meant nothing, he had another thing coming. I was going to find out everything about Miss Sophia Chen and her whirlwind romance with my ex-husband. What I discovered made my stomach drop. Sophia Chen had indeed worked at several prestigious museums, but her employment history had curious gaps. A year here, 18 months there, then nothing for 6-month stretches. Her PhD credentials checked out, but when I dug deeper into her dissertation, publicly available through Columbia's library database, I found something interesting. Her research focused on art forgery detection, specifically 20th century paintings. She'd written extensively about authentication processes, legal loopholes in provenance documentation, and the underground market for stolen artwork. That alone might not have meant anything, except for what I knew about Marcus's job. He worked for a high-end auction house, specializing in estate sales and private collections. He had access to pieces worth millions, many with murky ownership histories. He'd always been vague about the details, claiming client confidentiality. But I remembered conversations from our marriage, late-night phone calls he'd taken in his study, whispered discussions about irregular paperwork and flexible authentication. I'd assumed it was normal industry talk. Now I wondered if I'd been incredibly naive. I spent 3 days building a timeline, cross-referencing Sophia's employment gaps with Marcus's business trips. The pattern was damning. Every time she disappeared from the museum world, Marcus had been traveling to private estates, auction houses in Europe, exclusive art fairs in places like Basel and Miami. Places where a beautiful, highly educated art expert could charm elderly collectors or distract security while authentication documents were adjusted. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't a romance. It was a business partnership. And Marcus had divorced me not because he'd found love, but because he'd found something more valuable, the perfect accomplice. But I needed proof. Suspicions wouldn't be enough to destroy the life he'd built on the ashes of ours. I remembered the key. Marcus had never asked for it back. A small brass key to a storage unit he'd rented 2 years ago, claiming he needed space for his golf clubs and seasonal decorations. I'd found it tucked in an old jewelry box when packing my things, and I'd kept it without really knowing why. Now I knew why. The storage facility was in Queens, a nondescript building that looked like it housed nothing more exciting than old furniture and Christmas ornaments. My key worked on Unit 247, and when I rolled up the metal door, I understood why Marcus had been so secretive. The unit was climate-controlled and organized like a small gallery. Paintings hung on portable walls, each one carefully lit and labeled. Sculptures sat on pedestals. Everything looked museum quality, which I supposed was the point. But these weren't supposed to be here. I recognized some of the pieces from Marcus's client files, works that should have been in private collections or museums. Others were completely unfamiliar, but they all shared one thing: small, almost invisible marks in the corners that I remembered from Sophia's dissertation research. Authentication marks that could be forged, provenance stamps that could be replicated. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands steady now with purpose. Each piece, each label, every angle. Then I noticed a filing cabinet tucked behind a particularly large canvas. The files inside were meticulous. Records of purchases, sales, and most damning of all, 2 sets of authentication documents for the same pieces. One set showing legal provenance, another showing different ownership histories. Some of the pieces had been reported stolen from private collections or museums in Europe, and there, in a file labeled S. Chen Consulting, were payment records. Sophia hadn't just been Marcus's girlfriend for 6 months. She'd been his business partner for over 2 years, earning 6 figures for authentication consulting and provenance research. The marriage wasn't about love, it was about legal protection. Spouses couldn't be forced to testify against each other. Marcus had divorced me and married his accomplice to protect their operation. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. They thought they'd been so clever, so careful. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. That evening, I sat in my studio apartment with everything spread out before me like pieces of a puzzle. Photos, documents, timeline notes. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed to be smart about this. One wrong move, and they could destroy everything, disappear into the wind with whatever money they'd already made. I thought about going to the police, but I knew how these things worked. Rich, connected people like Marcus had expensive lawyers. They could tie things up in court for years, while evidence disappeared and witnesses forgot what they'd seen. No, I needed something more immediate, more devastating. I started with the art world itself. Sophia's reputation was everything in her field. I created an anonymous email account and began reaching out to her former colleagues, asking innocent questions about her research and employment history. I planted seeds of doubt about her authentication methods, suggested inconsistencies in her work. Then I went after Marcus's business. His auction house prided itself on authenticity and legal provenance. I sent anonymous tips to art recovery organizations, pointed them towards specific pieces in his recent sales. Nothing that could be traced back to me, just helpful suggestions from a concerned citizen. But the real masterstroke came when I remembered something from our marriage. Marcus was proud, almost to the point of vanity. He'd never been able to resist showing off his successes, especially when he thought he was smarter than everyone else. I created a fake Instagram account, posed as a wealthy collector interested in acquiring unique pieces with interesting histories. I reached out to Sophia through her professional channels, praising her work and hinting that I might be interested in pieces that were off the traditional market. She bit immediately. Within days, we were exchanging messages about exclusive opportunities and private collections seeking discretionary homes. She was careful with her language, but the intent was clear. She was offering to sell me stolen art, and she was documenting everything in writing. I pushed further, asked for specific pieces, mentioned that I wasn't concerned about overly rigid provenance requirements, as long as the quality was exceptional. Sophia grew bolder, sending photos of pieces I recognized from the storage unit, quoting prices that made my head spin. Then came the crucial moment. She suggested we meet in person to discuss the Monet situation. Apparently, they had access to a painting that had been reported stolen from a private collector in France 3 years ago. I agreed to meet, but not as myself. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Detective Rivera, who'd been recommended by my divorce attorney. For $5,000, money I borrowed against my credit cards, she agreed to pose as my representative at the meeting. The meeting was set for a coffee shop in the Upper East Side, neutral territory where Sophia would feel safe. Detective Rivera wore a wire, carried a briefcase full of fake cash, and played the role of a wealthy collector's representative perfectly. Sophia walked right into the trap. Over the course of an hour-long conversation, she confirmed everything I'd suspected. The storage unit, the forged documents, the stolen pieces. She even mentioned Marcus by name, describing their business relationship and how their recent marriage would simplify certain operational aspects. Detective Rivera got it all on tape. That night, I sat in my apartment, listening to the recording over and over again. Sophia's voice, confident and casual, discussing criminal activity like she was talking about the weather. Marcus's voice in the background when she took a phone call mid-meeting, telling her to close the deal quickly. I had them, but I wasn't done yet. The final piece of my revenge required patience. I waited 2 weeks, let them think their new client was still interested. I even had Detective Rivera send a few follow-up messages asking about additional pieces. Then, on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 month after seeing that first Instagram post, I made my move. I sent copies of everything to the FBI's art crime team. Photos from the storage unit, financial records, the recorded conversation, Sophia's entire digital trail of stolen pieces. I included a detailed timeline and a written statement explaining how I discovered the operation. I sent the same package to the NYPD, the auction house where Marcus worked, the Metropolitan Museum where Sophia was employed, and 3 major art recovery organizations. But the piece de resistance was personal. I created a beautifully designed digital presentation, complete with photos and documents, telling the entire story of Marcus and Sophia's art forgery operation. I titled it, "A Love Story When Romance Meets Grand Larceny," and I emailed it to everyone in both their contact lists, their families, friends, colleagues, everyone who'd congratulated them on their fairy tale romance. I wanted them all to know exactly what kind of love story they'd been celebrating. Then I sat back and waited. The first call came at 10:47 a.m. Marcus, screaming into the phone about harassment and defamation. I let it go to voicemail, then saved the recording. His panic was beautiful. The second call was from my divorce attorney, warning me that Marcus's lawyer was threatening legal action. I told her to send them copies of all my evidence and invite them to explain which part was inaccurate. By noon, the story had taken on a life of its own. Someone had shared my presentation on social media, and it was spreading like wildfire through the art world. Art Heist Love Story started trending, with people sharing their own theories about the case. The FBI raided the storage unit that afternoon. I watched from across the street as they wheeled out piece after piece, each one carefully cataloged and photographed. Marcus arrived in the middle of it, his face pale as paper, as agents escorted him away in handcuffs. Sophia was arrested at the Met, led out in front of her colleagues, and the media that had gathered after social media made the story go viral. The footage of her perp walk, still wearing her museum ID badge, became the lead story on the evening news. Over the next few months, the case unfolded exactly as I'd hoped. Marcus and Sophia were charged with multiple counts of art theft, fraud, and money laundering. The investigation revealed that their operation had been running for over 3 years, with stolen pieces worth more than $50 million. The auction house fired Marcus and faced its own investigation for failing to detect the fraudulent authentications. The Met quietly removed Sophia from all exhibition materials she'd worked on, and her PhD came under review when questions arose about the authenticity of her research. Their marriage became a legal liability rather than a protection when prosecutors offered reduced sentences in exchange for testimony against each other. The fairy tale romance crumbled under the weight of mutual betrayal, each trying to save themselves by destroying their partner. Marcus got 12 years. Sophia got 8, with deportation back to China after serving her sentence. But the most satisfying part wasn't watching them fall. It was watching myself rise. The investigation revealed that several pieces I'd identified had been stolen from Holocaust survivors during World War II. The recovery of these works and my role in it caught the attention of art repatriation organizations worldwide. They offered me a job as a researcher, tracking down stolen cultural artifacts and returning them to their rightful owners. It turned out that my skills at investigation, honed during those late nights digging into Sophia's background, were exactly what the field needed. My divorce had given me a crash course in forensic accounting, and my determination to uncover the truth had taught me how to find connections others missed. 6 months after Marcus's conviction, I was working with Interpol to track down stolen art across 3 continents. My small studio apartment was replaced by a brownstone in Brooklyn, paid for with the reward money from recovering several high-profile pieces. I never remarried, but I found something better than the relationship I'd lost. I found purpose. Every piece of art I returned to its rightful owner felt like justice served, not just for them, but for myself. The last time I saw Marcus was during his sentencing hearing. He looked across the courtroom at me, sitting in the gallery, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger or hatred, but recognition. He finally understood who I really was. Not the quiet, accommodating wife he'd taken for granted and discarded. Not the woman who would quietly disappear while he built a new life on the foundation of lies and theft. I was the woman who had destroyed him completely, using nothing but patience, intelligence, and his own arrogance against him. As the judge read his sentence, Marcus kept staring at me. I smiled, not the careful, small smile I'd perfected during our marriage, but something new, something sharp and satisfied and entirely my own. He'd taught me an important lesson during our divorce. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just getting even. Sometimes it's becoming someone better than the person who tried to break you. Sometimes it's realizing that losing them wasn't a punishment, it was a gift. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's watching them lose everything while you build a life more beautiful than anything you could have imagined when you were still trying to make them love you. The gavel came down with a satisfying crack, just like my phone against the wall all those months ago. But this time, I wasn't the one who was broken. I was the one walking away free.